Roll.
Glenn Whitley, County Judge.
Here.
Roy Charles Brooks, Commissioner Precinct 1.
Present.
Andy H. Wynn, Commissioner Precinct 2.
Here.
Gary Fickus, Commissioner Precinct 3.
Here.
J.D. Johnson, Commissioner Precinct 4.
Here.
Constitutes a quorum.
Thank you. Our invocation today will be delivered by Pastor Hinton from the Heart Song Fellowship Church in Fort Worth. Thank you very much, Pastor, for coming out today. After the invocation, please remain standing for our pledges.
Lord, we thank you for this court and the faithful men and women who preside here. Give them wisdom, counsel, protection, and guidance. And in the light of the reprehensible attack on America and its values on 9/11 and as recent as yesterday, I want to call upon the protection of God over our land, our courts, our public events, and our cherished institutions. It's so important for us to take a moment of prayer, not just a moment of silence, to call upon your salvation and deliverance. I have several scriptures here I think that will help us. Psalm 12 says, O Lord, you will keep us safe and protect us from such people forever. The wicked freely strut about when what is vile is honored among men. Psalm 32, you are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. From Psalm 59, deliver me from my enemies, O God. Protect me from those who rise up against me. Deliver me from evildoers and save me from bloodthirsty men. And then 2 Thessalonians, this is the last one. But the Lord is faithful, and he will strengthen and protect you from the evil one. Save us, O Lord, for we need you now more than ever. Amen. And I have a copy of this prayer if the court would like to have it.
Appreciate it very much. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Pastor, thank you very much for coming out. Thank you, sir. And I would like to ask today that as we close our court, that we do close it in memory of the 3 that were killed and the 100 plus that were injured yesterday in the Boston area. Mr. Manius.
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the Court, we have 2 announcements as it relates to the agenda this morning. The first one is under Facilities Management. Item 9F2, this is a Resource Connection Building Project. We're going to ask that we hold that item for a week. Second one, we'd like to remind the court that we do have a work session today, that it'll start at approximately 12 o'clock noon, and the work session will occur after we come back from closed session. And then finally, just a general announcement, the Commissioners Court will not be meeting next week. Our next meeting will be in 2 weeks from today. Thank you.
Court members, you have before you the minutes of our regular meeting of April the 9th.
Move for approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Fickus and Commissioner Johnson. Motion passes unanimously. Proclamations. Commissioner Johnson, you have a resolution and a proclamation this week.
I do, Your Honor. If you would read the resolution, National Osteopathic Medicine Week, into the record, please.
Whereas since osteopathic medicine was founded in 1874 by Andrew Taylor Still, MD, DO, osteopathic physicians have made tremendous contributions to the American healthcare system, treating U.S. presidents and Olympic athletes, contributing to the fight against AIDS and the fight for civil rights, and serving on nationwide health care panels and boards. And whereas the more than 78,000 osteopathic physicians currently in the United States are fully licensed to prescribe medicine and practice in all specialty areas of medicine, including surgery, and are trained to consider the health of the whole person. And whereas the UNT Health Science Center creates a healthier community for Tarrant County by training the osteopathic physician of tomorrow at the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine, and is among the nation's distinguished graduate institutions. And whereas the TCOM is unique among the state's 9 medical schools through its application-based medical school curriculum, cutting-edge research, quality patient care, dedication to rural medicine, and outstanding student performance in both academic and clinical studies. And whereas the citizens of Tarrant County recognize the need for osteopathic physicians who are committed to bringing attention to improving the health of Americans regardless of age, income level, or ethnicity, now therefore be it resolved that we, the Commissioners Court of Tarrant County, urge all citizens and community organizations to support this observance by helping to educate residents about DOs and osteopathic medicine, and further that we do hereby proclaim April 14th through 20th, 2013, as National Osteopathic Medicine Week in Tarrant County, in recognition of the contribution of the University of North Texas Health Science Center and its Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine to the overall health of our community. In witness whereof, we've heretofore set our hands and caused the seal of Tarrant County to be affixed the 16th day of April, 2013.
I move for its approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
I'd like to ask Dean Don Pesca and the group if he would meet me down at the podium, please. Good morning. How are you, sir? And I didn't want to embarrass you or me trying to pronounce all of your names, so I'm going to let you introduce these three.
I'm going to let them introduce themselves and have a small speech.
Sure, I'm I'm a second year medical student.
I'm Nicole Esmeralda.
I'm Heinz Schwartzkopf, first year medical student.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you for what you do. And hey, yeah, let's put up here where we can all get the picture. All right, and any comments you'd like to make before? Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Morning. Good morning. Mr. Commissioner, osteopathic physicians are surgeons, obstetricians, and primary care doctors. DOs are represented in all fields of medicine. We greatly appreciate the support of Tarrant County and are grateful for our partnerships at institutions such as JPS. For those here today who have not had the chance to visit TCOM, I implore you to stop by and see the result of your work and support. On behalf of the 800-plus TCOM students and countless DOs who serve Tarrant County, thank you for this recognition.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out today.
Thank you.
Y'all are really a great community partner, and we appreciate very much all that you do for our community, and appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Next, Commissioner Johnson, I believe you have a proclamation on National Crime Victims' Rights Week.
I do, Your Honor. If you would read that into the record, please.
Whereas 18.7 million Americans are directly harmed by crime each year, and each crime affects many more family members, friends, neighbors, and coworkers, leaving a lasting physical, emotional, or financial impact on people of all ages and abilities, as well as all economic, racial, and social backgrounds. And whereas when, in 1982, the President's Task Force on Victims of Crime envisioned a national commitment to a more equitable and supportive response to victims, the nation heeded this call to action and promoted victims' rights initiatives, effective and compassionate victim services, as well as just compensation and financial support. And whereas today thousands of victims' assistance programs provide help and support to child victims of violence and sexual abuse, stalking victims, survivors of homicide victims, victims of drunk driving crashes, and victims of domestic, dating, and sexual violence, as well as other crimes. And whereas the Tarrant County Coalition of Crime Victim Services, the Tarrant County Council on Family Violence, and the Tarrant County Sexual Abuse Advisory Council are joining forces with victim services programs, criminal justice officials, and concerned citizens throughout Tarrant County and the United States to raise awareness of victims' rights and observe National Crime Victims' Rights Week. Now, therefore, be it resolved that we, the Commissioners Court of Tarrant County, do hereby proclaim the week of April 21st through 27th, 2013, to be Crime Victims' Rights Week throughout Tarrant County and reaffirm this county's commitment to respect and enforce victims' rights and address their needs throughout the year. And further, we express our appreciation for those victims and crime survivors who have turned personal tragedy into a motivating force to improve our response to victims of crime and build a more just community. In witness whereof, we've heretofore set our hands and caused the seal of Tarrant County to be affixed the 16th day of April, 2013.
I move for its approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
And we have Kelly Willis with Victim Services with Tarrant County Juvenile Services, Sandy Branch, Victim Services with MAD, and Rachel Escamilla, Victim Services with MAD. If y'all would meet me at the podium, please. Good morning. Thank y'all very much for being here. Appreciate the work you do. All right, and any comments you'd like to make to the court? Thank you.
Each April since 1981, communities throughout the country hold various events as part of the National Crime Victims' Rights Week by promoting victims' rights and honoring crime victims and those who advocate on their behalf. On behalf of the Tarrant County Coalition of Crime Victim Services, I want to thank the court for this very special proclamation in our county. Our coalition will be hosting a tree dedication at the Tarrant County College Northwest Campus on Thursday, April 25th. Each of you, as well as the public, are invited to attend as we recognize this very special week in our nation. We have invitations for each of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
thank you very much.
Thank y'all. Court members, go ahead.
Before we go on, can we please recognize former State Representative Barbara Nash from Arlington is here with us in the audience.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Court members, you have before you the consent agenda.
Move for the approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Members of the court, we have three additional items to present to you under the administrator's section. The first item, we're requesting that the court approve a resolution supporting high-speed intercity passenger rail connecting directly to the central terminal areas of the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. We provided a copy of that resolution in your packet this morning.
I move approval.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a couple comments, if that's okay.
bet.
I think this is probably one of the most important decisions that we as a court will make, and it's a decision that will affect transportation and mobility, not just in the North Texas area, but really throughout the state of Texas for the next 100 years. What we're doing here is providing a connectivity to the airport, which is the front door of our entire Metroplex area. It not only ties together aviation with passenger rail service, it also provides rental car facilities, hotels, convention centers, which are in that area. But probably more importantly, we spent close to $10 billion that's being spent today providing freeway access for citizens all over the Metroplex to come to the center, which is our main transportation hub. So this is, I think, a very important event, and I appreciate the court's support.
I think it's also important to recognize that this project, should it happen, is not going to be publicly funded. All the money to finance for this project is going to be provided through private investment.
Correct. Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Members of the Court, if we could go to item number 3, we're requesting that the Commissioners Court approve the nomination of the J.L. Seeley Building, which is located at 801 South Main Street in Fort Worth, to the National Register of Historical Places.
At whose request are we doing?
This is a letter there's a letter attached from the Texas Historical Commission. This is a recommendation that has been made by the State Historic Preservation Officer, the Executive Director of the Texas Historical Commission, and that's the state agency responsible for administering the Texas Certified Local Government Program.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yes. A question. Do we know who owns this building and whether or not they are in agreement with designating this building as a historic? Because there are consequences to the owner from such an action.
Right.
Yes, sir. The owners actually hired an architect, a person to prepare the proposal, and submitted it to the Historical Commission seeking this designation.
All right.
Any other discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Ms. McMillan will be presenting item number 2.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You have before you a request to consider approval of a letter of concurrence regarding foreign trade zone designation for Lasco Products Incorporated. Lasco Products is the largest producer of cooling fans in North America, and at the Fort Worth location, they produce the pedestal and oscillating fans. The company's been in business for over 100 years, and they've had a location in Fort Worth for over 35 years. They are looking to receive the benefits of the foreign trade zone, which helps them recognize supply chain savings because of import reductions on import costs and increased security and speed of the imports coming in through customs. They are requesting that they be added to the DFW International Airport Foreign Trade Zone 39. Lasco currently employs over 300 people in Tarrant County with an average payroll of just under $9 million. Because the foreign trade zone designation will provide these savings in supply chain and enhance their business growth opportunities, they're expecting to be able to add new full-time positions to support the increased production activities. Currently, a majority of Lasco's inventory is already subject to the Freeport zone exemption. Now, the Freeport exemption. Now, the foreign trade zone exemption also provides additional exemptions on imported inventory, and only a little bit of that is already being taxed. So the difference in what would happen is approximately about $11,000 annually would be reduced from Tarrant County's current taxes, and a little over $10,000 a year from the hospital district. However, with the increased production activities, Lasco is planning to build a new warehouse distribution facility at a minimum investment of over $5 million. So they're requesting Tarrant County's approval of a no objection letter to receive the foreign trade zone designation, but at the same time, they have agreed to execute a payment in lieu of taxes agreement, which you have before you. In this agreement, they will build the new facility at a minimum investment of $5 million, and they will add at least 30 jobs to their employment base and retain the current employment, and this will all be done by the end of October of 2016. The City of Fort Worth has approved a similar letter of concurrence and a pilot agreement also. Now, with the minimum new investment, it's estimating that added tax from that will be a little over $13,000 a year for the county and a little over $11,000 a year for the hospital district, which would offset the loss we received because of the foreign trade zone designation. So what we have before you today is to approve, we're asking the court to approve a letter of concurrence to the Foreign Trade Zone Board allowing foreign trade zone application by Lasco Products for their facilities at 1700 Meacham Boulevard, which is the assembly plant, and at 4925 Pylon Street and 4600 Blue Mountain Road, which is our distribution and warehouse facilities. And also to approve the payment in lieu of taxes agreement between Tarrant County and Lasco Products and authorize the judge to execute the agreement.
Move approval of all of the above.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes
you.
unanimously. Mr. Sugar.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Judge. The criminal judges have one item for your consideration today. It is requested that the Commissioners Court approve an electronic submission of the FY 2014 discretionary grant and resolution for the Texas Indigent Commission in an amount not to exceed $250,000. There are no matching funds required. The goal of this grant is to merge data collection into a single system to update our existing online indigent defense system to allow for efficient attorney appointment, jail release, attorney voucher approval, and expedite the payment to the attorney's defense counsel. The new process will create efficiencies in multiple county departments with the ultimate goal of realizing long-term cost savings. The program will complement and integrate with the new adult case management system currently under development. The automation of the appointed defense counsel vouchers and payments has been a long-term goal of the auditor's office and the criminal judges over the past 10 years. This grant will allow the delivery of this goal. Criminal Courts Administration has been working for a long time with IT on this, and I would like to thank and note that Steve Wetzel and his team did a fantastic job to get us to where we are today.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Phillips.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It is requested that Commissioners Court approve a professional services contract with Honfeld Hoffer Stanford for project administration, electrical engineering, and security consulting services to replace and upgrade the security camera system at the Tim Curry Criminal Justice Building and the Scott D. Moore Juvenile Justice Center.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I have no problem with this particular request. However, there are other cameras needed throughout Tarrant County, especially on our sub-courthouses that house ATM machines, which have become targeted recently. I'd like to see a proposal on that.
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips.
Any other questions? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Lynn.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
We have 4 items for the court this morning. The first item, we're asking the court to receive and file the personnel agenda.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
The second item, we're asking for a waiver of terminal benefits for the district clerk's office. The district clerk has a lead civil felony clerk who's retiring at the end of May with 400 vacation hours. The district clerk is asking that the waiver be effective June 1st. Fiscal impact, we're estimating to be approximately $4,500 to the general fund.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Item number 3, we're asking the court to revise the table of organization to reclassify Building Superintendent 1 in Facilities Management. Director of Facilities Management believes that this reclass is necessary to ensure control and oversight of the Lon Evans Correction Center. We're estimating the fiscal impact of this reclass to be approximately $6,000 to the general fund. However, the court should note that we've had cost savings on this position as it's been vacant since August of last year.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
And our fourth and final item, we're asking the court to approve TO changes to add 2 new positions to public health. This is the item that we had last week. As the court recalls, these 2 positions are being requested to support the West Nile virus efforts. I believe Mr. Maney has sent to the court members information yesterday with some further explanation. Suffice it to say, public health has determined that they can find funds from the current budget to fund the 2 positions being requested. We're looking at a fiscal impact of approximately $108,000 to the public health fund, excluding fringes.
This is critical to our West Nile efforts, so I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I'd like to make a few comments, please. The mission and the business of public health have to go on, and therefore I'm going to be in support of this. However, there are lingering issues relating to the relationship between public health and JPS, and also the requirements of the 1115 waiver. I have not been briefed by public health regarding the requirements of this new program. These are the issues I think have to be resolved. We cannot continue to move into the future without dealing with these issues. So I would like to make a public request for us to somehow come up with a certain methodology and have constructive dialogues from the Commissioner's Court to the Board of Trustees, the Board of Managers at JPS, for us to resolve this problem, or I wouldn't call it problem, issue once and for all. That's the comment I would like to make. Thank you.
I guess the one question I said, you indicated, I thought through your comments, that they were able to find the money within their current budget.
Correct.
If that's the case, then I thought it indicated that there was a fiscal impact note attached of about $107,000.
Correct.
So how is it if we're able to find it within the budget, is there still a fiscal impact? So there's not a fiscal impact, it's still within the budget.
The action,
And I want to echo what Commissioner Wynn, and what I would like for us to do is I'd like for us to set up a joint meeting with, this has been an ongoing discussion back and forth, and I know this isn't your area, but this has been an ongoing discussion back and forth since we moved the public health over to JPS in 2000. And, you know, I think we need to bring both groups together and decide how we're going to oversee and what we're going to do with public health from that perspective, and whether we as the Commissioners Court are going to be responsible for it, or whether JPS and their Board of Managers are going to be responsible for that as far as the overall oversight on that particular deal. I don't think it's, you know, just as we make recommendations to JPS now about priorities, I think we could still make the same, you know, suggestions and have the same discussions regarding whether it be West Nile virus or whether it be anything else from that perspective. But, you know, I've argued all along that once we moved public health over, that really the oversight over public health should be through the JPS and through their Board of Managers. And I have never felt like, and still don't feel like, that we do much more than simply present them with the budget and say, here, rubber stamp it. And, you know, if that's all we're going to do, then we'll just take it back. But if we are going to do it, and we are going to let that budget be carried under JPS, then we should look for JPS to collaborate with the folks in public health. I'm not saying they are going to, you know, micromanage public health, but I do believe that that ought to be a consolidated, and I believe, I understand their missions are not quite the same, that public health is, a lot of that is preventative, whereas a lot of JPS is basically taking care of an event as it occurs, but it still centers around the health care And with the 1115 waiver and with everything that is moving in that direction, I think healthcare is trying to move more and more into a preventative wellness as well as a how are we going to better manage healthcare as it presents itself to us today. So one of the things that I would like to ask, and I'll ask Mr. Early to, and I've actually talked with Trent Petty, their chairman, about the possibility of us having a joint board, commissioners court and board meeting so that we could really kind of talk through this whole issue as it pertains to public health and how we kind of look at that into the future. I know we've got a lot of stuff going on in the next couple of months, but I think that's something that as we move into the budget process that it would be beneficial for us to do.
Certainly, I don't have a problem with a joint meeting, but to say that there is a problem between the management of public health and the management of John Peter Smith Hospital is to vastly overstate the situation. The fact is that public health and John Peter Smith Hospital are charged with doing two completely separate things. Certainly, there should be collaboration between the two to make sure that there is no duplication of services. But that collaboration is happening on an ongoing basis. It happened in the 1115 waiver process to make sure that the projects that public health are asked for funding for did not duplicate, but in fact complemented the projects that JPS asked for funding for. So these relationships are ongoing. Our goal, my goal, is to see a seamless health delivery system from education and outreach through prevention to tertiary care. And everybody ought to bring their resources together and collaborate to make sure that happens. But that's exactly what we're doing now.
Well,
there is no problem. And I have spoken with Trent Petty, and he has told me they've got no problems with what we're doing. They've got no problems with public health. They don't want to operate public health. It's not the business that they're in.
Well, I disagree, and I don't get the same information from people on the board that you're obviously getting. So that's why I think bringing the boards together will be that. I think when you have two different groups managing the resources under one group, you have a problem. And so I would like to bring the groups together and to talk through that process because I do sense that the missions are the same. It does deal very much with the health care. And there are duplications. I believe there are duplications that are occurring right now and have continued to occur. So I think we can have a joint meeting, and if we get everybody in the same room and everybody says things are going great and singing Kumbaya, then okay, we'll go forward. But I think we need to get to the point, and I think if we bring everybody together at the same time, then we'll get this stuff worked out.
I cannot speak for other members of the court. For me, I have been sensing a sense of confusion between the way we are funding public health from a budgetary standpoint and certainly some other programs and so forth. And I feel like the team members at Public Health deserve a very clear and unified vision. And by having a joint meeting, we can discuss about any potential confusion, resolve them, refresh whatever decision that has been made in the past, updating it if necessary, modernize it if necessary, and then give public health one clear and crystal vision so that they can move forward without having to take 3 steps forward and moving 1 step backward, move to the left, move to the right, and dodging. And that's what I have been observing. Now, that's my personal opinion, and I could be wrong. As a result, because of my observation, I'm supporting us, the court, and the Board of Managers at JJPS to have that joint meeting so we can work out whatever issues we have and come together on one same page. And that's my comment on this issue. Thank you.
I'd like to call for the question, please.
Any other comments, discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Ms. Brewer.
Public Health has one item for your approval today. This is a memorandum of understanding with the Fort Worth Independent School District.
I move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Beecham.
Your Honor, the members of the court, we have one item for your consideration this morning. That is a bid award recommendation for bid 2013-058, which is for removal of underground petroleum storage tanks and installation of above-ground storage tanks at Precinct 1 maintenance facility. Recommendation will be towards the Hill Company with a base bid amount of $193,545 plus contingency scope items. If this is approved, we're seeking contract approval and acceptance of the payment and the performance bond.
Move approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
They signed their bid, huh? They signed their bid?
Well, I hope so. That's one of the requirements.
Commissioner Fickus, I believe you have an interlocal agreement.
I do. Let me move from the item I was on to,
There you go.
hang on. Let me get past okay, we have interlocal with the city of Hearst for work to be performed on Norwood Drive, and I move for approval.
Second.
Actually, a couple of projects here.
We have a motion to approve 9L1A and B.
Right.
And a second. Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Commissioner Johnson.
I have an interlocal agreement with the Azle Independent School District, item 9L2A and B. Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Appointments.
Yes, sir. I've got proposed nominations to the Human Services Advisory Committee for a term to run from March 2013 to February 2015. The nominees are Michelle Bearfield, Bruce Frankel, Dr. Deborah Ann Hill, Ted Lovato, Connie Neshwatomi, and William Farrago.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. What members you have before you the claims, including the addendum?
Move approval of claims, including the addendum.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Briefing items, Mr. Mayes?
Thank you, Your Honor. We have two items to bring to the court this morning. The first is the monthly update from Tarrant County Hospital District. Mr. Early is here to address the court at this time.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Everybody turned around and looked at me like it's death coming up here. I'm fine, and thank you all very much. Ms. Glenn, you want to stand next to me for a minute? I do want to make a few comments. I want to congratulate Commissioner Johnson on his recognition of Osteopathic Week. The partnership that we have with the University of North Texas Health Science Center and the UNT system as a whole is one that not only we appreciate, but we always want to try to figure out how to enhance it. And I applaud their interim leadership of Dr. Michael Williams and the effort that he's made. Dr. Williams and I have met 4 times since he came here, and that's impressive. and his willingness to want to try to figure out how we create a continuum of health care. And that kind of effort I appreciate. So, Commissioner, I appreciate the fact that you want to recognize them and keep them always top of mind in our community. The other thing I want to let y'all know on a more difficult note is what we saw yesterday in those pictures. People gathering from around the world and the nation to run an athletic event and to be shocked and surprised by what happens at a finish line that couldn't be anything more than what you would think in the celebration of a beautiful spring day and completing 26 miles. That gentleman that you saw that fell when that bomb blast went off, he got up and walked to the end of that route because he was not going to allow that to stop him. The thing that was true to me that should be true to all of us is, God forbid that that happens in our area, but if it does, those patients are coming to your level 1 trauma center. And we try every day to be prepared for an event like that. We always think that won't happen, but at JPS we have to think that it could and it might, and when it does, we're prepared. One of the doctors that they interviewed in the emergency room said it's organized chaos. When those events take place, you can't be prepared for what it's like when you get 20 people in your emergency room in your trauma center. But I do want to tell you that JPS goes through a series of exercises to prepare itself for something like that. We don't want it to ever happen, but if it does, I want to be in the best place we possibly can be, and my heart goes out to the folks in Boston and those medical teams up there. So should it happen here, I hope that we'll do as good as the incredible people in Boston have done, and they deserve not only our thanks but our appreciation. So I hope we're not put to the test if we ever are. I hope we will rise to the occasion, but you'll never know until it happens. But if it does, we'll give it our best. So thank you all for your indulgence of that. I think it's powerful. Let's talk a second about public health. What we do at JPS is one of our 3 golden rules at JPS is that you own it. If you come in the doors at JPS or you wear a badge that says you work at JPS, you own the organization of JPS. Every person that works from environmental services to the doctor doing neurosurgery has an ownership. It's the difference between the car you rent and the car you own, and the appreciation for when you wax the car you own and when you clean it and you take care of it as to the car you use for a day and take back to the airport. That cultural change at JPS is that ownership, and I will tell you that that ownership and that cultural change has taken place by an incredible board that we've had in the past 6 years and the changes that you all have made to it, and you all. The fact that you're debating what we do with public health, quite frankly, is the fact that you have a vested interest in caring about the people, whether you represent the viewpoint of Commissioner Brooks or you represent the viewpoint of Judge Whitley or Commissioner Wynn, Johnson, or Commissioner Fickus. It's all the same. You care. That dialogue that we'll have with Lou Brewer and G.K. Manius and whomever, because I think our board wants to have that dialogue. And if we discuss things we've already discussed and we're in a great position, then we'll confirm that. If we're in a position where there's been some questions and we're not sure where we're going and how we do it, then we'll resolve those. So I welcome the communication between the board and the court. I know that Mr. Petty and the board members feel the same way. We discussed it, and we're happy to do whatever it takes to create a better continuum of care. That's really ownership. So I thank you all. I joked about it earlier with Ms. Glenn, but I want to tell you all that that kind of dialogue doesn't cause me any consternation or concern. It causes me the fact that you've got a bunch of people that care. And when you care, you just try and figure out what you do right, how you effectively spend tax dollars, and how you can create a continuum of care model for some areas that may be overlap and some areas that may be distinctly different. And so that's what we'll do, and we'll continue to do that. It was that collaboration and that cooperative effort that you all helped put into place when we announced on Friday with the Fort Worth Foundation. That is powerful. What you said, Commissioner Fickus, about the potential for high-speed rail and what we're going to do to move people from one side of the state or the county or the nation from a transportation standpoint, whether it be on ground or high speed or any other means of transportation, is powerful. What you did today is powerful. What JPS and what we are allowed to do with your leadership on this court and what the Fort Worth Foundation did is phenomenal. I appreciate the Star-Telegram writing an editorial about it yesterday. I appreciate the report that they had Saturday in the newspaper, because this community, all of Tarrant County, needs to know how powerful that was. And I was honored that the Fort Worth Foundation saw to it to say, we want to do this partnership with JPS, because the first thing and foremost is the health of the most vulnerable of our populations. And if JPS were to ever think of turning its back on that population, shame on us. And not only do we need to figure out what we do, it's just not, one of the things we're trying to do at JPS, I'm sorry I'm giving more orations today than anything else, but one of the things that we're trying to do at JPS is it's not about just taking care of somebody. We do that with the homeless population right now. We take care of somebody that collapses on the street, they come to our emergency room, we make them better, and we put them back on the street. They collapse, and we come back. It's a continuous circle that we do. If JPS is to succeed for its taxpayers and the patient, we have to do a better job than just taking care of people who show up at your front door. You got to direct them the right way. You got to get them in a clinic. You got to get them into urgent care rather than emergency care. If it's a trauma, you got to get them into the trauma center and get them fixed. So that announcement on Friday was incredibly powerful for this community, and it potentially creates a model that maybe we can look to when we look to the situations in the Northeast, and we look to the situations in Azle and Lake Worth, and we look at what happens in Arlington and other parts of Tarrant County. It can well be a model for not only us, but others in helping an incredibly vulnerable population. So, Commissioner Brooks, hats off to you for an undying effort to deal with the population that people want to not look at sometimes. And to the rest of you, Judge and Commissioners, I appreciate your efforts in allowing us to sell that land back to the Fort Worth Foundation. There's no interest in a profit standpoint or anything else. It is the right thing to do with their wonderful situation of building us a clinic, which we would not have been able to do. We just don't have the money to do it. But we do have the personnel and the management to be in there and care for those people. We just don't have the money to build the brick and mortar. So I appreciate the court and the dialogue that we're going to have regarding not only public health, but all issues. That dialogue should always take place, and we ought to make it an effort to either do it 2 times a year or 3 times a year or whatever it takes. Happy to do that. So mine is just accolades for y'all. I appreciate it. I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all have.
Well, I just want to make a comment that the board came up with a new policy of visiting all members of the court regularly on a quarterly basis and keeping us update and also allowing us an opportunity to share our concerns, viewpoints, and opinions. I think that's a great policy, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. They're a good board. They really are. Y'all need to know that your appointees are doing a good job. And they do a good job when they take me to task and they take the hospital and network to task. And they are a great board when they give us accolades and say, good job. And I appreciate it. They're a tough board, and that's what they should be.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate everything you do.
You bet. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Robert.
Are you going to let the Star-Telegram know that your last name has 2 E's in it?
I'm okay. It was a nice editorial. My daughter was the one that seems to be the most upset about it. So I'll talk to her and calm her down. She can be really tough. Thank you.
Members of court, item B is the legislative issues. Mr. Mendez has provided a memorandum for your review. Just one quick comment. We're starting the last 6 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks of the session. It's pretty hot and heavy down there. It will be for the next 2 weeks or so. And so we're watching that. You'll probably be communicating more and more with Mr. Mendez. And with that, if there's any questions that you might have on his memorandum, I'll be more than happy to try to answer those for you.
The one thing I might mention is the fireworks debate is going hot and heavy. And the fireworks folks are really pushing to basically do away with our ability to declare any kind of a disaster and to prevent that. So I would strongly recommend that you communicate with any of the representatives, state senators that you know, and express to them, they are leaving the impression that we're constantly abusing that ability to ban or to ban the sale, and that is certainly not the case here in Tarrant County, and we've not been able to find very much evidence, if any evidence, statewide that it's happening. And so I think it's critical that we talk with everybody and let them know that, that we take this very seriously. We don't band unless the numbers are in place to justify what we do, but that it's very critical that we be able to do that, because their attempt out there right now is to take that totally out of our hands. So there's a lot of debate going on about that this week. So
Not a good bill.
It's not a good bill at all, and so we really need to work on that. Anything else?
Not at this time, Your Honor.
Then we will recess from open session and proceed to closed session to discuss items exempted under Section 551.071, 072, 074, 076, and 087 of the Texas Government Code. Go.
Members of the court, we're now going to go into a work session that is part of today's agenda. We're going to be talking about retiree health care. We're going to be focusing mainly on post-65 Healthcare, we will be talking a little bit about pre-65 healthcare. Just one or two comments, and I'm going to turn it over to Tina. What our goal is to begin a discussion with you all. This is going to be more of an educational piece today. I believe that PEBC is going to have numbers as it relates to the senior supplement and the Medicare Advantage sometime in May. And we'll have that information. Then we'll have another meeting as it relates to this. Our goal is for the court to make a decision sometime at the end of July, first part of August, that will coincide with our budget-related issues. That way, it'll give direction to the budget department, and so we'll have this out of the way at that time. With that, Ms. Glenn, if you want to address the court.
Thank you, Mr. Manius. Mr. Manius has summed up where we are, I think, well. And what we have planned for today is we'd like to spend the next 20, 25 minutes, maybe a little bit longer if the court has questions, and I'm sure you all will, to take a look at a couple of things. The format that we have today is we want to spend a little bit of time talking about current plans that are available to retirees, so just a refresher. Then we want to talk a little bit about trends, what we're seeing in the marketplace, what other employers are doing, just so that we're aware. And then finally, there's going to be some discussion about GASB, our costs as they've been estimated most recently, and then what strategies we might want to look at to try to address those costs. So as Mr. Manius indicated, we have PEBC here, specifically Diana Konjovic is here today, and she's going to walk us through the presentation.
Arrow down.
Will do. Good afternoon, Judge Whitley and Commissioners, and thanks for allowing me to come in front of you today to talk a little bit about retiree health coverage, as Tina mentioned, trends and things that are happening in the market. Joining me today is Rich Mackesy, who is the Senior Actuary with Towers Watson, and he's going to step up to the podium and talk a little bit about some of the information that we have in front of you today. Basically, what we want to talk about is setting the stage. How did we get to where we are today? A little bit about employers offering retiree health benefits, what you have today. There are some strategies to impact costs. We're not saying today that you have to decide what those strategies should be, but we want you to know about them. And then there are some specific modeling examples that can affect cost and your OPEB liability or your GASB liability. One of the items, the last one, Medicare coordinator approach, even though Rich Mackesy is going to talk about the various modeling examples, I'm going to come back for a moment and talk to you about a potential PBC-wide initiative that I'm going to ask our board to look at for 2015. So let's set the stage a bit. Again, this is intended to be an early start to a discussion about employer funding of retiree health benefits. And it's just one step in a continuing effort to identify and discuss the often competing, and they are competing, and have become even more complex factors involved with retiree health funding. As I mentioned earlier, this is not meant to imply that you should make a decision, increase or decrease, eliminate or discontinue retiree benefits. But I have to say, with the increased health care costs, health care reform, GASB 45, sustainability has become a significant issue for many employers. And at the same time health care reform is going on, different post-65, particularly with post-65 retiree benefits, different models are emerging for providing those benefits. And at the same time, we know that not every retiree is the same. They take different medications, they may need different formularies, they may need different plan benefits depending on their own situation. And of course, our plan is a one-size-fits-all. And so, again, while you'll see different illustrations today, they're not intended for anything other than to show you different illustrations as you form your decisions. This slide is basically showing you the percentage of employers that offer retiree medical benefits to newly hired employees. This does not mean whether or not they have them today, but if you were a new hire, how many employers now offer retiree benefits? You'll notice here that less than half offer post-65, and right around a third offer pre-65 retiree health benefits. We put this slide in here only so that you can see with employers doing that and you offering full retiree health benefits, that does create a little bit of impact. And at the same time, the industry is changing and new models are emerging because of this trend. So the rapid shift that's taking place, particularly for post-65 retirees, if you look on the left-hand side of this slide, in the employer-sponsored plan world, which is you're an employer plan sponsor, the pool is shrinking. There are fewer than 6 million individuals covered under employer-sponsored retiree medical plans today. And why is it shrinking? Well, retirees are aging out of various programs, and there are fewer new entrants, so the pool is getting smaller. At the same time, we have a significant amount of employer administration. Much of yours is borne by the PBC, but you still have a significant amount individually in trying to counsel retirees and help them identify what's best for them, even if you can identify that, because you may not have all the relevant information. We do know that there's suboptimal value for retirees given the reform enhancements for private plans. And just so that you know, even though many plans do not do this, the PBC group plans have always provided, quote unquote, enhanced prescription drug coverage for post-65 retirees, because we have always allowed co-pays in what they call the donut hole, or the coverage gap under Medicare Part D, where some people, there's a period of, I think it's around $4,700, that they have to pay 100% of the coverage. Your retirees have never had to do that. It's always been, yes, sir.
Could I ask a question
Sure.
about the shrinking pool? Given what we know about the aging of our population and the increasing longevity of our population, why is the pool shrinking?
Well, I'm talking about the employer-sponsored pool, meaning those that sponsor employer plans. Because they're living longer, because of the longevity and the cost, that is shrinking as fewer employers provide coverage for retirees.
The employer-sponsored pool is
Correct.
shrinking.
Yes, sir.
But the Medicare coverage pool is expanding.
Correct. It sure is. In the Medicare individual coverage world, not sponsored by an employer plan, we know that there are about 45 million Medicare participants. 39 million of them don't have employer coverage. And, of course, that number is growing as more people retire. 11 million are in Medicare Advantage plans, or I put HMO after that because a Medicare Advantage plan is a Medicare HMO. It has very narrow network, fewer doctors, limited coverage area, other things that are consistent with a Medicare HMO. The reason you see Medicare Advantage plans, though, at a smaller rate to both individuals and to employer sponsors is because the federal government still significantly funds Medicare Advantage plans. And we'll talk about that in a minute so you can see how much that impacts you as a plan sponsor and your retirees. The other thing that's going on, the market has already been, quote unquote, reformed due to universal coverage, significant federal subsidies like for Medicare Advantage, the private insurance market to complement or replace Medicare. You'll see more what we call street plans for Medicare Advantage or senior supplements. Even Medicare themselves have on their website the ability for an individual to log in and see what plans of what types are available in your area and at what cost. And then the other thing that's happening in the marketplace, the enhanced Part D prescription drug value under health care reform. By 2020, you will see that donut hole going away. It's over the next few years reducing until it finally goes away. Your retirees don't feel that at all because they've always had co-pays during that coverage gap. So the thing about this is there's a diminishing, just industry-wide, not so much here, but industry-wide, a diminishing business rationale for sponsoring or subsidizing post-65 retiree coverage, given the presence of Medicare, the private insurance market, the Medicare prescription drug benefits, and things that are changing. Many employers simply feel they don't have to do that anymore with post-65s because the private market is offering so much. And the reason I say that you may have competing interests is because what this doesn't say is there are plenty of employers out there who still feel committed to retirees and want to look at this from beginning to end to make informed, viable decisions, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So today, what do your retirees have access to? Well,
let me interrupt you for just 1 second.
Yes, sir.
Back on that previous slide where you were saying fewer than 6 million individuals are covered under employer, do you have any breakout as to how much of those 6 million are government versus private sector plans?
No, I do not with me today. Rich, let me turn to you. Do you have any, you don't have that with you today either? Sorry, Judge, I don't have that with me today, but whether it's government or private sector, we know that that number has been shrinking. I would suspect, mainly because there are more private sector employers, is probably weighted on the private sector side, and those that have stopped coverage anyway. I can get that information for you.
If you get that, then, and to the extent that you can get it with, once you get into the private sector, or even for that matter in the government sector, it would be interesting to know how much of those are required by contractual, either competitive or not, but more labor contract type stuff or collective bargaining that requires it versus are doing it.
Right.
That sounds like a low number.
6 million?
Oh, I'm talking in the country of retirees.
6 out of 45 million. So it's about, you're right, I mean, it's about a seventh or.
It basically would, those that are still covered today, I would think would be only those with some sort of labor agreement requiring it for retirees or government, because private sector, you already saw, so many of them are already out of it, that they don't even have them covered in employer-sponsored plans. So to the extent the number of employer-sponsored retiree plans has shrunk, so has the number of retirees covered under those plans. But I will get some more information on that, Judge. So today, let's first talk about pre-65 retirees. And while this is basically targeted toward post-65, we have to mention you do have pre-65 retirees covered under these plans. The pre-65 retirees and their dependents can enroll in either the EPO or PPO medical plan. And Chapter 175 of the Local Government Code provides that a pre-65 retiree has the right to purchase continued health benefits coverage, but it does not require an employer subsidy. It requires access to the same coverage offered to an employee. And that's Chapter 175 that basically kicks in connection with your pre-65 retirees. So let's talk about post-65 retirees. Post-65 retirees can enroll in a group Medicare plan. We have a Medicare Advantage or a senior supplement plan. And these are not the same plans offered, quote unquote, on the street. They may have different formularies, co-pays. There could be many different things different. I'm just lumping them all together and saying this is not an off-the-street plan. The Medicare Advantage group plan is typically the least premium to your retirees. Why? Because of the significant amount of federal funding. As I mentioned, it's a narrow network, not a lot of providers compared to the big, broad United Healthcare network that folks have access to. The Medicare HMO requires a retiree to coordinate care with their PCP. All of our Medicare plans include prescription drug coverage. Just to give you an idea of the amount of federal funding, the federal government funds about 86% of Tarrant County's Medicare Advantage cost, which means the county is sharing 14% of the total cost with retirees. Okay, so when you look at those rates, that's, you know, the total accrual rate or the total premium rate is the 14% number. That's all that you have to pay, and then, of course, your retirees contribute to that, and you contribute to that.
Give me an idea of how much, what is the total, what, under that scenario, I don't remember what our rates are, that 14%.
Well, if it's $150 total, is 14%.
Okay. So it'd be $10 per percentage point, so.
About.
So 100 would be 1,000?
Yeah, it's about that.
A month?
Judge, what was your question?
Well, if the $150 represents 14% and the federal government's picking up the other 86%, then that's $150 a month, right?
Correct.
So then that means that overall the annual cost of that plan would be about $12,000. And the reason I asked that question is in 2018, is the federal government going to write itself a check for?
Sure.
No. Thought.
Well, and the key to that is, and just to give you a little bit more heads up, this is pretty recent. Even this past week, it was thought that the amount of federal subsidy toward Medicare Advantage as part of PPACA or healthcare reform would be reducing. And they were thinking maybe 2-3%. And I think what caught some folks off guard last week was that CMS actually came back and said, we think we ought to be increasing it by about 3%. So what does that tell us? That tells us that you likely won't see any dramatic rate increase in your Medicare Advantage. I don't have the final rates yet, but it shouldn't be a dramatic increase unless the experience is dramatically increased, which we don't expect. But regardless, that subsidy is the piece that the federal government pays a private carrier to assume the role of Medicare. So when somebody signs up for the Medicare Advantage plan, they go through that company for everything. Medicare pays, CMS pays that private plan. And that's, in effect, what happens with our Medicare Advantage plan today. The federal government pays the carrier, so the carrier only charges you 14%.
So, Diana, let me
Yes,
ask you a
sir.
question. I've always been confused on this, and HR has tried to explain it to me, and I still haven't gotten it. I know that or I've been told that if a person is on Social Security, that, I don't know if it's A or B, but the federal government will take out a certain amount of money that we have to pay in, and it's 150 or 160 or 170. Is that money used to buy a Medicare Advantage plan for that employee, or is it just something that the government takes?
Well, that's an excellent question. It really is, because it's part of the complex part that things kind of bump together and it gets confusing. Let me just say this. To be enrolled in a Medicare, group Medicare plan or any Medicare health plan, you have to have Medicare Part A, which is the hospital part. Typically, nobody pays for that. There are a few people that might have to, but I don't think you have anybody in that category. Typically, it's free. Most people enroll in it. It's free. You have to have it to enroll in the Medicare Advantage or the senior supplement. It doesn't matter if it's our group plan or any other group plan. You have to have Part A. You also have to have Part B. Part B is the portion that is typically referred to as professional services or physician services. It covers a lot of things that Part A does not. Part B is not free. Part B is actually deducted for somebody who's on Social Security from the Social Security check. And it's, I don't have the exact number, I believe it's about $115 or so for most people. But it's based on income. So the more money you make, you could pay more for that Part B coverage. You have to have Part B, regardless of what Medicare plan you're on, whether it be our plan or another private plan, Medicare Advantage plan. So whatever your retirees are paying, once they hit 65 and they want to enroll in a Medicare group plan, they also have to have Medicare Part A and Part B. The Part B portion is deducted from their Social Security check, And it's in the amount of, again, for most people, somewhere around $115. I don't know what it will be for next year because it changes from year to year. So that portion is required of a post-65 retiree. So just as I mentioned that the Medicare Advantage plan is a replacement for Medicare, that means that the reason the government is able to pay, in part, the Medicare Advantage subsidy is because of that Part B premium coming in. It's not quite as much that they have to pay that company, but in total, it's about 86% for Tarrant County. There are plenty of Medicare Advantage plans in this area. That's not the same all over the country, but there are several in this area. They all have slight differences. And one of the key differences that I would say would be in formulary. For as many different plans as you find in this country, you'll find just as many different formularies. So that's one of the key components that people look at when they enroll in a plan. The senior supplement plan is not a Medicare replacement plan. The senior supplement plan is almost like, it's called a Medicare wrap sometimes. Sometimes it's referred to as Medigap. Sometimes it's referred to as the secondary payer after Medicare. Basically, the senior supplement plan is this. The claims get filed to Medicare and the senior supplement pays what's left, only for those expenses that are covered by Medicare. So, for example, a retiree who enrolls in this plan is basically getting a 100% plan, period. And when you enroll in this plan, you can buy it, in our world, with or without prescription drug coverage. And you might think, why would anybody want it without prescription drug coverage? I've had that question. And the answer is because you do have retirees who are covered elsewhere, or maybe retirees of other entities, and may like this drug coverage better, or may just use a private Part D plan that they can get down at the local pharmacy or whatever, because it covers one drug more than they have under this plan, or differences or whatever. So regardless, it's about retiree choice, and so we offer that with or without prescription drug coverage. That's what you have today for post-65 retirees.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Perhaps you mentioned it, but I missed it. The senior supplement group plan, does that cost the retirees any money?
Yes, it does. There is a cost for the senior supplement plan, and you pay a portion of that, and the retiree pays a portion. It's a higher premium typically to the retiree than the Medicare Advantage, but retirees do not get that coverage for free.
And how much do you recall right offhand what that total premium is? Is it back in the back a little bit further?
$460 a month for one individual.
60, 100?
460. How much of that does the county pay?
We pay 53% of that, or approximately $244. It's not, we have another handout if we wanted. I didn't know we were going to get into that. That'll answer some of those questions.
So I guess we're basically then under the current scenario for about $240 a month. That'd be 24, about $2,880. A senior guarantees that they're not going to pay anything other than that amount, and everything else is going to be covered at that point.
Yeah, there are some things that Medicare limits. For example, physical therapy, and once you hit a certain amount, there is no more coverage.
Thank you.
For the
But
things
if
that
you had this supplement, would you not be able to continue?
No, only for those things that Medicare covers.
Okay.
So it won't go beyond that. But there are only a few things like that in Medicare.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to move on, and if you have questions, I'll be glad to come back to anything. Wow, that gold color does not do well on a screen, I decided.
It does a lot better on our screen than it does on that.
Sorry about that. This is just a snapshot. This is not how many retirees have been in and out of your plans over the years. It could be very different, but I just picked 2 points in time, 2004 to 2013, and compared, so you can see the population growth of your retirees. So the first column shows you for pre-65 retirees in 2004, on March 1, 2004, you had 201. On March 1, 2013, you have 251. For post-65 retirees, on March 1, 2004, you had 393, and on March 1, 2013, you have 542. So if you count just the retirees and not their dependents, just the retirees, 594 in 2004 and 793 in 2013. Then we have what we call dependent ratio that tells us, so basically how many dependents per retiree. Well, once you get into retiree world, you see fewer and fewer dependents as they age out or children have their own coverage or whatever. So basically your ratio is for every one retiree, basically it's not moved that much, about 1/3 of a dependent, or another way, for every dependent that's covered under a plan, there are 3 retirees. So if you look at total lives, in 2004 on March 1, you had 919. March 1, 2013, you had 1,077. So I won't read all that to you, but it's basically showing the snapshot increase. That third red bullet there tells us, though, the average age in April 2013. In April 2013, the average age of a pre-65 retiree enrolled in the EPO plan is 60. The average age of a pre-65 retiree enrolled in the PPO plan is 61. That's just the retiree. If you look at post-65, the average age of a retiree enrolled in the senior supplement in Tarrant County in April is 75. Medicare Advantage is 72. I suspect that Medicare Advantage would be right up there with 75, except you do have a handful of disabled pre-65 retirees who qualify for that plan. So I think it's still pretty much 74, 75 years old in both of those. This next section I did not prepare, but Tarrant County supplied these numbers to us so that we could have them available for you. And GK, feel free if I leave something out here that you want added. According to TCDRS, in connection with pension only, remember in our context, pension is not relational to the retiree health care. But the average age is 62 years old at retirement, 18 years of service at retirement. Keep in mind that includes prior service credits, so we don't know if all of those years were worked at Tarrant County. And the average benefit, $25,000 a year, and that was at December 2011 based on TCDRS actuarial value at that point in time.
TCDRS basically has come back and said that this also held true for up to December 2012. So you're looking at current. This is just simply a snapshot of who are our retirees.
Okay, so these are some of the strategies we're going to talk about. As I mentioned earlier, first of all, let me say this too. To get down to 18 slides, there's probably 18 pounds of information just sitting on my desk. So we're really giving you a bird's eye view of this, trying to zero it down for you. But the overall marketplace for retiree medical and retiree prescription drug coverage is definitely shifting away from plan sponsorship. Why? Because there's so many robust post-65 opportunities, meaning street plans, other sponsors. There's hundreds and hundreds of them now, and it's growing all the time, especially with healthcare reform. However, some organizations may wish to continue providing retiree medical and prescription drug plans. And, we're not saying you shouldn't do that. But if you do that, we understand there's a need to address the rapidly rising cost associated with that. You really can't avoid it. And so the question then is, what are some options? And for this particular portion of the discussion, we're going to talk about GASB. It does not necessarily mean how you should share costs with your retiree. We're talking about what are some options to impact the liability under GASB. Whether we're changing the future eligibility for retiree coverage for current active employees, whether reducing or eliminating financial subsidies for dependents of retirees, whether you cap the employer's financial support for employees and dependents or a combination of all three. And what Rich is going to show you, Rich Mackesy from Tower Swanson, what he's going to show you basically are some bookends, worst case, kind of in the middle, so you know where those limits lie. We do know that we can achieve these options to impact your GASB cost at least by using either a hard cap where an employer subsidy doesn't change in the future. For example, if you approve, this is not a real number, if you said we're going to contribute $250 a month to each retiree, and we're not going to change that, that would be considered a hard cap. A soft cap may be that you increase it by a certain percentage, and Rich will go through some of those examples. And then there are some employers who may wish to provide financial support to retirees, but remove much of the administration associated with plan sponsorship. And when I talk about administration, I'm not talking about nobody wants to do the work. I don't think there's any better example of how people want to do the work than how your retiree coverage has been working. Your folks here, I know, because I work with them a lot, bend over backwards to help every single retiree as much as they can. I know that your direction is in that same regard. However, it's becoming so much more complex, and now you're starting to get into areas where you may not be aware of some of the issues that the retiree has for whatever reason. So there's this competing factor. How do you provide financial support but eliminate that part of it to make sure they're getting the best type of support? And so there's a couple ways to do that. One way, a retiree reimbursement account, we call it an RRA, where it keeps an employer involved financially, either with a fixed amount or one that increases from time to time, but it eliminates much of the administration. And there's significant lead time recommended for this, for educational purposes and more, which is why our board at the PBC has just heard mention of this in the past. Once we get through our current project, we'll be talking about it more for 2015, is the potential of doing a program like that for retiree coverage. I comment at the bottom here, pre-65 retirees can utilize health savings accounts, but those are not employer contributions once somebody has retired to a health savings account. What that means is a retiree can certainly place post-tax dollars into an HSA if they wish, or if a retiree has an HSA account when they retire, they can use the funds from that account after they retire. So I'm going to stop for a moment and let Rich talk to you about some of these illustrations, primarily intended to impact GASB, but I think you'll see from the discussion there's value in other ways. And I'll also be stepping back up when we talk about the Medicare coordinator model. So, Rich.
Just a quick comment on the pre-65 or the pre-65 retiree HSA. While the county can't put money into it as HSA, that retiree can.
Yes.
And once they put it into that, there is a, Judge, I believe there's a deduction on your tax return that would make that, while you have to pay the taxes up front, you get to deduct that fee. I noticed on this year that there was HSA was specifically identified on the tax returns.
I think if you put HSA contributions in, it's actually, I think it may be before tax, because I think you get a deduction which would make it a before tax deal.
That's right.
So it may not be a payroll deduction type issue, but it's something you can contribute to that basically gets you to the same place. Is that a good comment?
There's a maximum amount that can be contributed either by the employee or by the employer or by a combination of both, I believe.
Yes, and even if you're over age 55, I believe you get to contribute a little bit more as a catch-up.
Yeah, $1,000.
But when I was talking about post-tax, I should have clarified, I meant from a payroll perspective. Clearly on the tax return, there is the ability to enjoy some savings from that. So let me turn it over to Rich for a few minutes, and I'll be back.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So, as Diana said, there's going to be a few financial models that we're going to go through and show you the impact on the GASB liabilities, and also what that does to the employee-employer cost share. So the four that we're going to focus on are the four that Diana outlined: a soft cap, a hard cap, a grandfathering approach where current employees and retirees would see no change in the benefits that they currently have, but then new employees coming in would have a different subsidy available from the county. So we'll look at an example of that. And then finally, we'll look at an example of how this exchange model might look for post-65 retirees, how that would impact the cost share between retirees and the county, and how that would impact the liabilities. So before we go into the four kind of alternatives as we've coined them here, we just wanted to get a little bit of grounding as where our current GASB liabilities are, as well as how our current cost-sharing model works. And so these valuation results are based on the 2011 valuation that was prepared by Towers Watson, using data as of October 1st, 2011, and claims information at that time. And based on that valuation, the retiree medical plan has an actuarial accrued liability of $354.4 million. What that liability represents is the present value of all future payments for retired members from the county, all the county subsidy, plus a portion of the present value for all active employees who are expected to retire, expected to elect medical coverage, and then get medical subsidies in retirement. And that portion for the active members is based on how much service they had as of the valuation date. So that $354.4 million represents the liability for all retirees and a portion of the future benefit payments for actives, depending on how much service they had as of the valuation date.
So, Rich, if you would also point out of that $354 million, how much of that is allocated to post-65 and pre-65?
Right. So of that 354, $229 million represents the benefit payments or the subsidy from the county for people who are going to be receiving these benefits post-65. That doesn't mean that they're currently post-65. It just means that for the benefit payments that we're going to make, or subsidies that we're going to pay post-65, that $229 million represents the present value of all those subsidies post-65. $125 million represents the present value of all the subsidies from the county pre-65. Now, clearly, a person can be in both categories, because we could have a retiree right now who's 60. And so 5 years' worth of that subsidy would be in the 125 number, and then all the years after age 65 would be in the 229. So what that means is we're focusing on post-65 plan today, or the portion of the plan that's post-65. We're talking about the $229 million portion of this liability, and not the $125 million portion of the liability, which is for all those subsidies for pre-65 retirees. I know it's complicated, but are there questions about that?
It's ludicrous.
Excuse me?
It's more like ludicrous,
Oh.
because there are so many assumptions that one can't really verify that, it's just a shot in the dark, and GASB is what it is, and it requires what it requires, but there's no way to scientifically validate any of it.
Right. I mean, the actual cost of this plan is going to, no one can determine it until the last retiree dies and receives a benefit, and then we can go back and look and add it all up. But
and on top of that, your cost, the estimates you're using here project in 50 years $250,000 cost per year for an active employee.
I haven't verified that, but over 50 years they would go up significantly, yes. I mean, the trend assumption that we use assumes that total medical costs in the first year go up 8.5% a year. That trend in medical costs scales down over time, but that the ultimate increase in medical increases is going to be 5.5% a year above inflation is what the assumptions are that are used in the valuation. That's true. I haven't calculated out how much that would be in 50 years, but it would be significant.
The one reason why we point this out is because our pre-Medicare retirees, they are on our self-insurance plans. Once a retiree gets into Medicare eligibility, they go on a insurance policy, if you will.
Right.
Okay. So that's the actuarial accrued liability required by GASB. GASB also requires another calculation which they deem the annual required contribution, but it's not a required contribution. It's really an expense amount, a non-cash expense amount for the plan. And what that ARC represents is interest on the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. So it includes interest on the $354 million, plus the value of the benefits that are earned by active members for one more year of service. Recall that I said that the 354 included the liability for active members, but only based on service at the valuation date. Well, the assumption is some of them will work one more year, and that one more year would increase the liability, and GASB requires that amount be expensed as well, and that amount's known as a service cost. The sum of that interest cost, the interest on the liability, plus the service cost, in this case is $37.5 million, and that's what GASB requires be expensed, not the cash, but be expensed for the retiree medical plan. Okay? So in the table is just a little description of where that 354.4 comes from. As you know, the county subsidizes these benefits, and the employee or retiree pays for some of these benefits. So the total cost of all these benefits, regardless of who's paying for them, whether it's the retiree or the county, is actually $582.5 million. But when you apply the cost-sharing arrangements, both pre- and post-65 between the retirees and the county, you can see that the employee is expected to pay $228.1 million of that $582.5 million, giving the net county liability of $354.4 million. So when we're talking about the county's portion, it's always important to remember that it's out of a bigger piece, because retirees are also paying for a portion of their own coverage, and that's where the 582.5 comes from. So we'll use that table as we look at some of these alternatives later on. We'll also use the chart on the right, and what the chart on the right represents is how the current post-65 cost for our post-65 retirees is expected to increase over time. And here we did it over the next 30 years. And also, based on the current provisions as to how the cost sharing works, how much of that increase will be borne by the county and how much will be borne by the retiree. So you can see that the total of those two start out at about $5,000 in 2011. So in 2011, the total cost for our post-65 retirees per retiree was about $5,000, and that represents a weighted average between the senior supplement plan and the Medicare Advantage plan. Diana talked about how the Medicare Advantage plan is less expensive than the senior supplement plan, but there's a lot more people in that senior supplement plan in 2011. So when you take a weighted average of the total cost, you get about $5,000 a year between those two plans. The county, which is the cross-hatched area on the bottom, picks up a little more than half of that $5,000, and the retiree, which is the red area, picks up the rest. But based on the assumptions that I talked about before about how medical costs are going to increase in the future, you can see that those lines increase dramatically over the next 30 years, and what is $5,000 in 2011 becomes just shy of $30,000 in 2041. So in 30 years, that amount, based on the assumptions and evaluation, is to increase just shy of 6 times over the next 30 years. But you can see that the increase on the retiree and the increase on the county is the same. That percentage of what the county pays and what the retiree pays is the same as it is right now. And that's the assumption that's used in the valuation. So before we get to an alternative, any questions about this slide?
What assumptions do you make to come up with this increase in health care costs over that 30-year period?
Right. I mean, so the assumption is it starts out at 8.5% in the first year, scales down 0.5% a year, and then levels off at 5.5% per year. As you said before, no one knows what that's going to be in the future. There are expectations in the short term that that number is going to be significantly higher than inflation. You know, we can get some information from insurance companies and other sources as to what they're doing in the short term. In the long term, the expectation is that that number cannot remain that high because it will overtake the entire GDP of the country if it remains that high. So there's an expectation that it'll trend towards inflation, but not to inflation. And so we've got a 5.5% long-term assumption for this trend assumption. Inflation will be less than that. But the thought is with medical care, because of higher utilization or because of advancements in technology, that it will always be greater, that trend assumption will always be greater than inflation in the economy. And that's a general assumption for plans like this in calculating these types of liabilities. But that's a little bit of the basis of where that assumption comes from.
Can you explain again the annual required contribution?
I can. So the annual required contribution is made up of two pieces. One piece is interest on the $354.4 million. Because we've got that liability. That liability is a discounted value of all future payments, and so it's going to grow with interest every year. So a portion of that ARC is interest on the 354. The other portion of the ARC is based on the fact that active employees who are expected to retire and expected to elect these benefits are going to have one more year of service. And GASB requires that we accrue the liability over all their years of service. So when an active person gets one more year of service, they're going to have one more year's worth of liability. And so the other part of the ARC is that service cost, which is the value of one more year's worth of service under an accrual formula for the benefit.
The annual required contribution, if we made it, would in effect is it over a 20-year period?
It's 30-year.
30-year period, get us enough money to be able to continue to pay that as we continue the benefits.
Yeah, so if you contributed to ARC every year over 30 years, that would get you a fully funded plan, 100% funded on all liabilities, but you would still be required to pay that service cost for all future years. So as actives get one more year of service, you'd have to contribute that. And there's a number there for that. In 2012, that number was $23.8 million.
And the determination is made based upon assumptions with regards to inflation for medical, earnings potential, discount rates, all different things go into that, all of which are assumptions.
Yeah,
And I feel like Don Quixote tilting at a windmill because all of this is so speculative.
And all of this is, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Those who have the authority to say how we account for our dollars say this is the way we're going to do it.
And the thing that troubles me throughout the whole process is people tell us, the accountants and everybody tells us over and over that financial statements are ours, and yet they're requiring us to put a liability on the books that today,
that we don't even have.
Today or next Tuesday or the Tuesday after that, we could eliminate.
That's right.
That service cost, is that in addition to the ARC?
It's a portion of the ARC.
It's a portion of the ARC.
Correct. So, yeah. Okay, so moving on to a soft cap alternative. So if the subsidy from the county was frozen at a 2013 level, then allowed to increase at only 3% a year rather than that 8.5% to 5.5% a year trend assumption that we talked about a second ago. If that amount was allowed to increase at only 3% from the county standpoint, you can see that under Alternative 1, the actual accrued liability would be reduced to $263.6 million, or a $90.8 million savings from what we currently have. But in this alternative, since all we're doing is freezing the county's subsidy, we're not doing anything to the total cost of medical benefits. And so we'd be saving $90.8 million, but the employees over time would be paying $90.8 million more for that coverage, because we're capping the county would cap their subsidy increase at only 3% a year, and the retiree would bear all the rest. So this total, that $582.5 million liability for all these benefits stays the same. The county reduces their portion Therefore, the employee's portion would go up.
Did you look at what our actual medical increases, cost of our medical coverage was over the last 5 or 10 years?
I've looked at it for the post-65 group. I had those numbers.
And it matched the 5.5% or the 8% or whatever you used in
So you had 4 years of tremendous increases, about 8.9% for one of the groups, 7.5% annual increases for the other groups. So you had 4 years of tremendous increases. The last 2 years of increases, one, there was a change in the plan provisions, which reduced the benefits, the cost of the benefits to some extent, and then the benefit cost was reduced even more than that, and then they were flat the next year. So you had 4 years that were above our assumption, and then you had 2 years that were below the assumption.
And those were for post or pre?
Post. And that's significantly below, those 2 years were significantly below the assumption.
And the years that were, you're saying significantly
Well, they were
large were the 8.9, which is what you estimated for the first year next year.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
So it wasn't significantly above, or you wouldn't be using that same estimate
Yeah.
for next year?
If I said significantly above, I apologize. I didn't mean to say that. I said they were at or above what we assume for the 4 years and significantly below for the other 2 years, is what I meant to say. If I said something else, I apologize.
So during that period of time, there was a change in the plan,
Correct.
which produced this significantly below assumption.
It was a portion. Actually, it probably wasn't even the main portion, but it was a portion. I mean, the other was, thank you.
I'm going to butt in for a moment,
Thank
if
you.
you don't mind. I want to first talk about, if you don't mind, Commissioner, the plan change. The plan change was not a plan change that would affect any retiree. It was when the prescription drug portion was accounted for differently. We called it EGWIP, EGWP, the Employer Group Waiver Program, which allowed us to get a better rate for that senior supplement and Medicare plan. Again, the retiree coverage did not change one bit because you always covered drug coverage in the copay. But what it did do is it allowed the total premium that we paid or that you paid in 2012 to be significantly less because of that. We negotiated that actually a year before CMS did.
Okay, but the question that I was going to ask is that since that plan change caused our cost to go down significantly compared with your assumptions, why going forward did you go back to the old assumptions, which were significantly higher than our last 2 years of experience?
Yeah, I'll turn that back to you, other than to say we did factor in that reduction in that assumption, right? That 18.5.
Yeah. I mean, so the savings was included in that valuation. And so we ended up with new claims costs, and they are subsidies, and they went into the 2011 valuation because we knew about that savings. But there is still this expectation that over time, that medical costs are going to increase at a pace faster than inflation. I mean, that is still the expectation. So just because there was a savings in a year doesn't mean that still over the long term that costs aren't still going to escalate faster than inflation.
We're talking 2 years, not 1.
Right? And then the 4 years before that, they all increased. We only have 6 years. So we had 4 years of increases, 1 year of significant decrease, and then 1 year of flat. But if we think there's going to be inflation in the future, medical costs have to at least increase by inflation, because that's how, that's part of inflation. And the expectation is that for medical benefits, based on the past and what we expect the future to be, that the cost of medical benefits are going to increase at a rate even faster than inflation.
So how many years do we have to form a trend that if it's below? Because obviously the last 2 years, what you're saying is it's been below inflation.
The last 2 years have been below inflation. That's correct.
So how many years do we have to be there before you figure a trend?
Thank you, Judge.
Yeah, it would have to be there a long time.
That's 4 years, 6
Well,
years, 2
I mean,
years?
so medical costs in this country have been escalating faster than inflation for almost every year for a long, long time.
But they did in the last 2 years?
For you. For everyone else, they did.
Well, so you're not doing an actuarial assumption for everybody else, you're doing it for us.
Right. But your plan is a very small piece of what the total is showing us is increasing at a much faster rate. So if the expectation is that you'll be able to remain at this lower rate just because, it
Well,
doesn't...
when does just because become a trend?
A lot longer than 2 years. I mean, I said it takes a long time.
Define a long time.
I would have to see...
You've taken 4 years at what was the market. You've taken 2 that was that, and now you've gone back up to the 8.5, and you've stayed at 5 from that point forward.
Yeah, but we didn't use your... So if your 6 years of actual experience, as it comes to setting this assumption, were barely used. What's used is the fact that medical costs in this country have increased at rates higher than inflation for a long time and are expected to continue to do so for a very long time.
Even under the Affordable Care Act?
Right.
Yes.
Are you taking that into consideration?
Yes.
I thought that was supposed to drive costs down.
It may decrease the increase, the otherwise increase in costs, but it's not expected to drive costs down.
That's not what I heard from the White House.
Well, okay. It's not going to drive costs down. Lower than, I mean, okay. We'll see.
Meanwhile, we're paying while we see.
You know, we're recording a liability while we see. We're paying at whatever we're paying.
Exactly.
The problem is we're fixing to stick a liability on our financial statements. It's going to be about $354 million. And regardless of what, last time we thought we were doing things, and it went from 229 to 354, a lot of because of the fact that there's also a discount rate. So you make the assumptions that our medical costs are going to continue to go up, but you keep the discount rate assuming that it's never going to go back up to where we were earning as much as what we were earning in the past.
I mean,
right?
Yeah, yes, it's what the accounting standard requires, but yes,
But the accounting standards tell me that they're doing it based upon what you as actuaries require. And trust me, I know that because I've been screaming at the 5 of them, just like I'm screaming at you right now.
Okay.
And they say, well, this is what the actuaries say, and we're putting it all off on the actuaries. And so you're standing here putting it all off back on them. And what I find very difficult is the fact that you're willing to make assumptions that looks at a very long period of time on the medical, but you don't take the same look on the return on investments. And you make the assumptions that because in the last very short period, not 30, not 50 years, you use a discount rate that is very, very low and had a $90 million impact on our last actuarial assumption. And you're blaming that all on GASB.
Yes. I mean,
I want the record of this meeting to go to GASB because I'm going to tell you that's not what they're saying.
Okay.
And isn't it you that is supposed to be making the assumptions?
No. They're not the actuaries' assumption. We make recommendations. The county, as you said, the county's responsible for the financial statements. The county's responsible for the assumptions.
But you're not listening to what we ask you to do from those assumptions.
Okay.
Isn't that right?
I
We
don't
want
know.
a higher discount rate, you're going to say no?
We send out a questionnaire with recommendations for assumptions and input. And we send that out before we did the evaluation.
So then what I'd like for you to do is get that list of assumptions again. I'd like for you to tell us what the discount rate has been over the same period of time that you're looking at medical costs. And if that's a higher discount rate, then that's probably the discount rate we'll go with. And then I guess we'll argue with our CPAs about whether or not they're willing to accept that or not.
Okay?
Please continue.
Okay. Thank you. Trying to remember where we were. Okay. So on this alternative with a 3% soft cap, we talked about the actual accrued liability savings. There's also a savings in the ARC, the annual required contribution, and that's made up of 2 components. One, the service cost piece, which is the value of 1 more years of service for actives, has gone down. And then the liability went down, so the portion of the liability that we have to pay for in the ARC has gone down. So there's an $11 million savings in that annual expense amount from $37.5 million to $26.5 million. The impact on the retiree, though, we displayed on the prior page, but this chart actually shows it in a more graphical nature. The graph on the left is the current plan, as we talked about before. What happens on the right is you can see that the total cost of the plan is still, in 2041, that same $30,000. But the county portion was capped at increasing at only 3% a year. And you can see that the crosshatch area between the graph on the left and the graph on the right has gone down significantly. And that's where the cost savings comes from the prior alternative on the prior page. But you can see that we haven't done anything to the total cost. What we've done is we just shifted what the county is subsidizing and shifted that back to the retiree. And that's why that red shaded area is so much larger than it was before. But that's where the savings comes from.
The problem is most retirees are on fixed income. How are they going to absorb that additional cost?
Right. I mean, so this isn't a recommendation. I mean, it's just education today, but it was just to show how an alternative, but that's a perfectly valid question. Is that
so then in our calculations, we should be able to assume that at some point in time, once your numbers are greater than 100% of what they're getting in retirement, that they're going to drop off. And we should be able to give you that assumption, and you fill that into our blanks.
Okay. This isn't your situation, though. You're on the left. But, I mean, I will say this. If you shifted so much cost to the retirees that they could find a better deal out there somewhere else, we would take that into account in our assumptions.
Well, in the assumptions that you're making, a retiree right now, 50 years from now, if they retire, I mean, we're going to be able to calculate what their pay might be, making certain assumptions with this deal. What I would say to you is that once the health costs that you're doing, I think it's $85,000. 50 years from now, it seems like I recall that
well, I mean, $30,000 post 65 in 30
years from now.
30 years, right? Okay.
If you take that same worksheet and you run it out, I've got it, and I'll be glad to send you a copy of it. Your predecessor out there calculated that for us. I think that the Medicare, someone that was post 65, was going to be paying somewhere close to $35,000 a year in medical costs, and we were going to be paying something like $50-something thousand a year for that individual.
Yeah. I mean, all I have is the 30-year numbers here, so I can't say.
Rita, if you're listening to this, get the worksheet that Ron Bertel sent me, and it should be over in PBC Bertel, and forward it to me on my laptop. Continue, please.
Okay. So any other questions about this alternative, and we'll move on to the second alternative. We're good? So the second alternative, unlike the previous one, which had a 3% increase on the county subsidy, this alternative, too, has no increase on the county subsidy. So the county subsidy would be frozen at a 2013 level and stay at that level for the remainder of the retiree's lifetime. And so here we still have that same $582.5 million liability in total, but you can see the employee now has, or the retiree, has a greater share of that cost, $368.8 million. And since the county subsidy is now frozen, that number becomes $213.7 for a $140.7 million savings in actuarial accrued liability. That amount, as you can see, is the present value of the costs for the retiree going forward. But again, we end up with a savings in service costs, a savings in ARC, and we end up with a complete $16.6 million savings in that annual required contribution over what the plan currently has. As we move forward to the graph, you can see here in the graph that it's even more pronounced than the prior graph, which is that if the county were to subsidize, freeze their subsidy, that crosshatch area remains the same over time, but the amount that the retiree would pay increases significantly over what the current arrangement is. Okay. So the third alternative is a grandfathering alternative where we don't change the benefits for any current employee or any current retiree. but we implement a soft cap for new employees that are hired in the future. And you can see that in this case, Alternative 3 costs exactly the same as the plan costs right now, because in our 2011 valuation, or in our valuations in general, we used a population that exists at that time. So in this type of plan, whereas it would eventually save the county some money, both from an accounting standpoint and a cash standpoint, from a valuation standpoint, it doesn't, because we don't include any liability for employees that are not yet hired. And so if we do significant grandfathering and only change her for future employees, the liabilities and the ARC remain the same. But the cost sharing is different. And so what this table represents, the chart on the left is our current plan. The chart on the right would be the cost sharing arrangement for new employees coming in, which is the graph that we saw before that had that 3% increase in the county subsidy on it, but a much bigger increase on the retiree. So I think Diana would like to go through this slide, and then I will talk about the fourth alternative.
I was hoping you had something other than that.
I've got one more.
And as I mentioned earlier, some of the competing factors here as we look through these alternatives, these are not the only alternatives. These are just three to show wide swings, one direction or the other, so you can determine where you want to land at some point. And this is also not to suggest this is how you should charge your retirees. This is basically a post-65 discussion for GASB in this particular section. But the reason I wanted to talk about the Medicare coordinator model is because this is something relatively new that has emerged that is building steam and appears to be highly valued by those retirees that participate in such a model. And just to basically, speak off the chart about it, this is something that I plan to bring to the PBC board in coming months because it's a model that would give the retirees the greatest amount of choice, the greatest amount of focused assistance with knowledgeable folks that do this every day, and take advantage of a wide array of plans, not just one, and also perhaps assist you in how to reel in some of those costs without shifting everything to a retiree. So I wanted to preface this slide with that conversation because this is something that really may emerge as a viable model that you'll hear more about. You're just hearing about it first. The Medicare coordinator model is basically what it's doing is moving the coverage from the PBC Senior Supplement Plan and the PBC Medicare Advantage Plan to a third party that becomes, for a better choice of words, a Medicare coordinator group who, based on that retiree's own needs, determines what plans are out there that would meet their needs using their available resources. And their available resources may include a certain amount still contributed by the county. So let's just kind of use a couple of examples. A retiree who has an enormous amount of chronic health conditions, takes a large number of prescription drugs. They may need something that has, maybe they don't travel very much, they live locally. Maybe a Medicare Advantage plan would be the best for them, and then the next choice is, so what can you afford? What's out there for what you can afford? And that's the model somewhat that this is based on. If you look at the left, the employer at the top has very limited interaction with the retiree in terms of which plan do they choose, because they'll be assigned their own Medicare advocate, so to speak, who will meet directly with them. In the middle column, Medicare coordinator, we would probably, if this passes our PBC board review, contract with a Medicare coordinator organization that would then have access to the wide array of benefit plans that would be targeted toward a senior population. And then they would be the ones to make sure that retirees are supported and communicated with. Whatever subsidy the county chose to contribute would be paid to the Medicare coordinator on behalf of that retiree. And then we can design it where we either roll over the funds from year to year, or we can say what we would likely do is use this for premium assistance only, so that whatever plan they choose, they would have assistance with paying the premium. It would include Part D if the retiree wants it to include Part D. Maybe they don't need any Part D from your plan, so to speak, because they may be covered under another plan. But the whole goal here is to get a wider array of choice for retirees based on their own individual needs, plus at a better cost. And I'm just going to give you a bit of history here because I looked up some history. When we started PDC Medicare plans for retirees, that was the goal of that project. It was a multifaceted project, but the key goal there was to try to find more senior-oriented plans at a better cost. And when we did that back in 2005, where the plan started in 2006, it was no small task because that's when costs were off the charts for retirees. They still have been growing at whatever level, but the point is that now, with so many plans out there, there's the ability to just stop having one senior supplement, one Medicare Advantage, and perhaps connect a retiree with a plan that fits for their own particular circumstances. So I'm going to let me just kind of pause there and let Rich come back up and talk to you about how this type of model might change things a bit. And again, what you saw before this was examples. This example, I think you'll find interesting because of what it can achieve from all sides of that equation.
Diana, this plan is not something that would be available next year. It's available January 15.
2015. Right.
What this does, it simply gives our retirees, post-65 retirees, a bunch of different options as far as either Medicare Advantage or the supplemental. And we still have the opportunity to contribute to that payment. But they would have their own, and I'll call them counselors, we call them coordinators, but to work with them to pick a plan that they can afford and that best suits their needs, rather than a one-size-fits-all that we have now.
Correct.
How are you going to bend the cost curve by adding another layer of administration to the equation?
Well, it's really not adding another layer, it's replacing a layer we have today. We would no longer have the senior supplement or Medicare Advantage group plans. We would have only the Medicare coordinator model. So it doesn't add one, it replaces one. And in fact, it's very likely, based on the sheer volume of plans out there and the volume of retirees that are starting to be attracted to these plans, that it might even reduce it.
Diana, the Medicaid, what do you call it, managed care model and the supplement model, those are both insurance products.
The Medicare Advantage.
Medicare Advantage.
Yes, they are.
They're insurance products.
They are.
This is not an insurance product. It's an administrative process.
Well, it actually is an insurance product. It's just you have access to a wide variety of insurance products that you don't have today.
Kind of a health exchange, right? Kind of a health exchange.
Well, that's one
It
way to look
functions
at
kind
it.
of like that,
Yes, absolutely. I think, Commissioner.
With somebody else getting a rake off on of the total cost.
Yeah,
That
and I
doesn't
have
go
to
to
tell you,
insurance.
yeah, and your point is well taken. This is the final detailed one slide. You know, we know everything we need to know, because obviously there will be questions that we have and answers to be determined and negotiations to be made. But it's a model that really, you know, as we look for how can we provide benefits in public sector where the goal is or the desire is to keep that going at some level, at the same time faced with all the various issues that we're faced with. Just to kind of put this in perspective, you know, all those private sector groups that dealt with FASB, not GASB, you saw how they dealt with it.
They dumped their plans.
They dumped them. And I'm not saying you should do that, but what we're trying to say here is there may be an alternative that may help you not even think of that as an option.
Not with the assumptions that you've got on the sheet.
Well, I just have to say, we are coming back to the assumptions. Absolutely. We have that information, we just don't have it with us today.
I've got it.
You do.
I can tell you I can tell you that right now in 8 years, right now our employees, according to the assumptions that the actuaries used, in 2013, our premiums, we were funding, the employee or retirees paying about $26.15. And we've got that let's see what we've got here.
That's pretty close.
Okay. Well, according the assumption in 2021 is that 26 is going to go to 42. Now, their retirement will not have gone up significantly. I don't know that it will have gone up. It depends on whether we're willing to give cost of living. We gave no cost of living. So if it doesn't, then they're going to be paying 42. In 2031, they're going to be paying 71 or 7,200, and in 2041, which is what he's showing on this chart here, they'll be paying close to 12,000, or about 50% of the 25,000 that they're getting in county retirement for their share of costs.
Well, let me go back then and step back so that Midge can talk with you about the same charts in connection with the Medicare coordinator model. Let me just leave you on this topic, that this is not the beginning and end of that conversation. There are many more questions, but at least we want you to see that that is something that has attracted our interest in a large way that may have more benefit than we first anticipated. So, Rich, I'll step back for you.
Okay, so in this model, as Diana said, when we go through this alternative, what was modeled was freezing the subsidy at the 2013 levels again, like some of the other models that we've had in the past. But it was also going to this coordinator model. Now, a couple things happened, and one of them is when we tell all retirees, post-65 retirees, that we're now going to give you a certain dollar per month to pay for medical coverage, and we go to this Medicare coordinator model, which has lots of plans available. You know, Diana said before that we have 2 plans. In this type of model, there's lots of plans that the retiree can choose from based on their cost needs, based on their medical needs. So if we, for example, if we were to say to a retiree, we'll give you $300 a month to buy coverage, well, some of those retirees are going to be able to find coverage for $300 a month or less, and they'll just take that coverage because now it's free. They don't need to pay for anything because we're giving $300. So in the model, we had to do a couple of things. One, we freeze that subsidy level. But 2, we also changed the assumption with regard to how many eligible retirees would now take our coverage. Because if we monetize that subsidy level, some retirees are going to be able to take that, buy coverage, add no money out of their own pocket to get that coverage. And so why wouldn't they take the money the county was going to give them? So we increased that assumption from 60% to 80% of those eligible to take these benefits would take these benefits. And so that
the only thing that seems wrong with that theory is that if your theory is that medical costs are medical costs are medical costs, and if they can take that money, you're basically saying that they can take the money and buy an insurance policy that will allow them to not have to pay anything more, and we'll have to pay less. But if the medical costs are the medical costs are the medical costs, then that means the insurance company out there is going to do this and they're going to lose money. And most insurance companies don't go into practice to lose money.
Right. And I agree with you. They're not in the midst of losing money. But when you have a government subsidy of 86% supporting some of these plans, like the Medicare Advantage plans, that changes the equation.
So really what you're saying is we ought to just put everybody into the exchanges, and then we'll make a lot of money, and the insurance companies will make a lot of money, and the federal government will spread the cost over all the states instead of spreading it over Tarrant County.
I mean, I don't know if you'll make a lot of money, but there is definitely an advantage.
Well, our $354 million will go down dramatically.
Well, it wouldn't go. I mean, it would go down $91 million in this example.
Well, if we put them all in the exchange, it'd go down a whole lot more than that.
It would, but then they'd have to pay for they'd have to pay for 100% of the coverage, and right now you're subsidizing a portion of the coverage. But yes, you could say to all your post-65 retirees, we have no coverage. go to the marketplace. You have that opportunity, and in that case, if I could back up a few slides, if you were to say that $229 million would go away, because that's what you're paying post-65. You'd still retain the one.
354 million.
No, 220. Well,
Post-65.
yeah. If you go to your post-65 people and say, go to the marketplace, we're not going to pay for anything, because there's a robust marketplace out there for you, you would save 229. If you said that to your pre-65 population right now, there's really not a robust marketplace out there for pre-65, and so they would be severely impacted by sending them out to a marketplace that doesn't exist. But there currently is a very robust, been around for a long time, post-65 marketplace. And this coordinator model, what it does is it puts somebody in between the retiree and that marketplace and helps them buy the appropriate coverage. Right now what's happening is that we're giving them two choices. They can take the senior supplement or they can take the Medicare Advantage plan. But there's a lot more choices out there in this insured market that may actually fit better for them than what they have, may cost more, may cost less. But what we're doing in this fourth alternative is that we're fixing our subsidy, in my example, at $300 a month, and that's just an example, and letting them go to that marketplace and buy what best suits their needs. But because we're giving that $300, some employees or retirees will be able to take that $300 and buy coverage and not have any more out-of-pocket paid, or very little out-of-pocket paid. And that's the reason we made the assumption that more people then would take this coverage from the county than currently do. But even with that assumption, there still is a $91 million savings in the actuarial accrued liability and a $10 million savings in the ARC with this type of a model. And when you look at how it impacts the retiree, we've talked a lot about trend. The thought is that with these insured products and with the federal government doing what they're doing, and with this 11 million person marketplace right now, that was a number on Diana's previous slide, that with the negotiating power that 11 million have, rather than the negotiating power that 1,000 have, that you can actually bend that trend line down under these insured products out there post-65. And so that you end up with a graph on the right where in the short term, the retiree, if we fix our subsidy at a certain level, may see a decrease in their out-of-pocket spending for medical coverage. And then over the long term, we'll see an increase, but not an increase nearly as much as they would have seen under any of those prior three models, because of the marketplace that's out there, how many people are covered in the marketplace, and the desire of the insurance companies to compete against each other for these millions of retirees.
Thank you, Rich. So
In the calculation right now on the assumptions, I noticed that for the cost for the non-Medicare eligible retiree that you used for, I guess, 2013 was $18,517, and yet our accruals are about $10,008. So why was the much higher? Did you just take 150% of what our employee accrual was and determine that that was going to be what the retiree cost was going to be for a non-Medicare eligible employee?
Kyle is not here today, and Kyle is the one that would probably be best poised to answer that question. But I can tell you that, the actuarial use or the actuarial work that was done for accruals was based on what that age level would be expected to pay at a reduced rate, not so much a blended approach. And I know that the county likes to blend that to get a better picture for budgeting or whatever reason. That's not exactly the same used for the actuarial piece. You can pay whatever you want to pay or charge whatever you want to charge, but the total cost is based on a different factor. It's not exactly apples to apples. But I can certainly come back to that, Judge, and provide more information on that.
But I just, under the assumptions that we're currently using to come up with 354, we're saying right now in 2021, the cost for a non-Medicare eligible retiree is going to be approximately $30,000 a year, of which we're going to pay $24,000, and the cost of the retiree is going to be about $6,000.
And you're talking about a non-Medicare eligible?
Non-Medicare eligible.
You want to go ahead and wrap up?
Go ahead.
Yeah, let me wrap up, and then I'll turn over. The one thing I can say about the Medicare coordinator model is that, to just kind of sum it up, this particular model, it perhaps allows a mechanism for a group to continue retiree contributions at whatever level is determined, and then allow access to buy across a wide array of products that the retiree can pick from. Plus, it allows and provides for counsel to a retiree in how to consider those plans and which one might be best for you based on your own situation. And then the one thing that we don't really talk about a lot, but happens all the time, is what happens when something changes in a retiree's life. And again, there's value in that. So when you can perhaps strike a chord in all four areas like that, we definitely want to take a look at that. And I just wanted you to see what that might do in comparison to at least other alternatives that we know are out there. They're not the only alternatives, but certainly ones that can give you a flavor for what it might look like. So unless you had other questions of me or Rich, did you want to?
Let me just wrap up and say that when we first started this presentation, we made the comment, this is an educational piece. We're not asking for any decisions today. And it's pretty obvious, and I think we knew this, but we wanted to make sure that the court understood all the dynamics that were involved in determining how this county is going to move forward with retiree health benefits. You know, obviously, there's an issue with some court members as it relates to OPEB, and we have some questions that we need to take back to our actuarials. And Judge Whitley, you had the bulk of those comments. Now, I would suggest that we have Tyrus Watson under contract with the county, and if we need to have, and I think we do need to have, some further discussions on how they calculate our OPEB issues, and we need to do that so that we can at least get to a point where we have some comfort level, or at least get to a point where we just have simple disagreement, and then.
Well, we need the accounting firm in here too, because it doesn't do any good.
You're absolutely right.
Year one without the other one saying
that may be meetings that we need to set up. In the middle of May, we're going to hopefully begin to know what our next year premiums are going to be. And as you heard today, while in a 5-year period, we had 3 years where it increased substantially. But then it took a nosedive on the 4th year, and it's pretty much leveled out in the 5th year. And I think we'll have a pretty good snapshot of what we may be able to see as we go forward, at least to a certain extent. And that will give you all the information that you need to do several things. First of all, it will answer some of the questions that the judge has raised about OPEB. And you're right, we need the actuarials and our outside auditing firm. It will also provide you all with at least 3 years of trending as far as what our current policies cost us and what portion we pay and what portion the employee pays. Then when we get to that point, we can make some decisions. One of the decisions is what impact or how much weight do we want to put on the accrued liability issue? And then second of all, how much of an increase do we want to charge to the employees versus how much do we want to accept at the county level? We normally go through a lot of that every year, especially the latter part. But this gives you all, I believe for the first time, a full picture of what staff and certain elected officials go through as we try to calculate and make recommendations to you as it relates to retiree health care. So with that, as I said, this is an educational piece right now. We have some questions to ask. If there are questions that you want to direct to Tyrus Watson directly or to PEBC, I would suggest we might write those questions down and submit them to them. If we need to bring we need to bring our outside accountants in also, and we'll ask audit to help us with that, and so that we can see if there's a better way of calculating the OPEB number, and then we'll continue to move forward. Our goal is to have this process ended sometime in late July, early August, to make a decision, so that we have that, so budget can factor in those costs or anticipated costs as we move into the next fiscal year.
One of the other things I think we need, we instituted a scheduled worksheet that said, based upon years of service, was how much we were willing to subsidize a cost for a retiree. And, what it basically was 0 to 9, it was 10 to 14, 15 to 19, 20 to 24, and 25 plus. And the 25 plus, what we said is that we would pay 80% and the retiree would pay 20%, and that's on this sheet. In talking with some other counties, first off, there's a number that don't provide any subsidy at all, but some also put in addition to some sort of a worksheet along this top lines, they also put in a minimum retirement age. With ours, basically, if someone came to work out of high school, then they would meet that 25-year mark at, I guess, 43. If they came out of college, then it might be 47 or 48. Some counties have said, okay, you got to be 55. And then we'll look at a worksheet from that perspective. That may be, something that at least we talk about or think about, and I just would suggest that, I don't know for sure whether or not that's anything any of us would be willing to look at, but at least that is something that says is, I want to recognize those folks and help those folks who've been with us, and this being almost kind of like a once, this is where I've spent my life working. I don't know for sure whether or not, if it's something a lot less than that, if that's something that we want to do, or if they go someplace else after having been with us for, if they're in their 40s or something like that, whether or not we want to continue to offer. The other barrier, I think, that is causing us to have to pay for a lot is the thought that once you leave, you can't come back. And so therefore we almost force them to stay with us if they retire early. The problem with that is the ones that are going to come back are likely to be the ones that have a problem, and in that situation, then we could end up having an issue. With the portability, maybe that's coming in under the Affordable Care Act, it might be that, our option would be if somebody wants to come back in, then we might continue to pay for an insured coverage if we could under whatever their prior employer was. I don't know what the options might be in that scenario, but there might be a way where we could still do that and save our plan from having that large cost. But right now, I think that is a hurdle that prevents many employees who retire from not giving up their coverage, as they know they can never get it back, and they may be concerned that, okay, I'm going to go to work for somebody, but if I'm there only 10 years and I'm 43, now I'm 53, I'm still 12 years away from Medicare, and I don't have any insurance coverage because not many other places are offering what we offer right now. So that's I don't know the answers, but I think it's something that that we need to continue to look at. And
Judge, that's one reason why we wanted to give you a snapshot of what our, what that average retiree looks like. The 62 years of age, the 18 years of experience, and how much basically the average check is, annual check. That's one of the reasons that we put that in this presentation. And Angela has something to say.
Uh-oh.
Your Honor, that's all we have at this time.
I have one question here.
Yes, sir.
Does the total number of employees does it have any impact in your calculation? Right now we have about 4,200 or so.
It does. So what we do is we assume that your active population right now continues to work or continue, they terminate or they do something. So we've got assumptions with regard to how long they'll work for the county, when they'll retire, if they'll elect coverage. But if you had twice as many active employees, if you had 8,000 people, it would double the liability for the active people if there's twice as many people. So it is a function of how many there are, but that's not all the liability. You've got liabilities for retirees as well.
function.
But it
So,
is a function of that.
For example, we expect Tarrant County to grow from 1.8 million to 2 million, 2.8 million people, okay? So it would be intuitive for us to think, okay, our number of employees may grow to 5,200 employees.
And that's not factored into our valuation. We use the 4,000, as of the valuation date, but not any growth in that number.
Please don't encourage him to jack up.
It's a potential, it will potentially impact all.
Yeah. I promise you I won't have an assumption for that.
This is based on actual, and it's not an
Yeah.
actuarial assumption. We track that in and out every week, every year, every month, and we measure it constantly. Those are the numbers that the actuaries had to make those assumptions.
I think that starting point is something, Diana, that I'd like for,
So we have to take that.
I know we've labored over that for years, but I think what the actual cost of our retirees and whether that's significant, our pre-65 retirees, and whether that significantly varies from what our active employees run, because obviously in the assumptions, we've used 150%.
Judge, that is a really interesting comment because it's one of the challenges that when you have such a small number of pre-65 retirees, a couple of hundred, it's nearly impossible to do any long-term projection based on a couple of hundred that 1 year could be up here and the next year down in the bucket. You can't really average it. You have to go by actual experience. So we're a little challenged on that.
Well, then I guess, that was my question. Does the 17 or 18,000 that we're using for actuarial assumptions, is that actual, or is that just a number that was pulled out of the air? It seems to be the 150%, which Ron, I keep remembering Ron always complaining that your accrual for retirees was 150% of what, I see you two laughing back there, was always 150% of what the active was, and it didn't make any difference what the actual costs were. And that the actuarial assumptions seem to bear that out, that you just picked 150% of what the accrual rate was, and then that's what you've been adding your inflation costs to.
Yeah, I'm going to go back and double check that, Judge. We're really talking about two different things, but I get what you're asking, and I am going to go back and check that. The fact is, we have to find some way to project and predict what a cost should be for a 165 retiree, where we know it's greater than an active. Even if you just went out to try to buy it, it costs more than an active. The other challenge is, even under healthcare reform, there are limits as to what that number has to be.
Well, I might challenge the assumption that it's more because you've got employees who've decided to retire and maybe go to work someplace else and just stay on our program. If they stayed on our program, we got two individuals, and the cost, one is an active employee and one who's gone to work someplace else. This active employee, we're assuming, is about a $10,800 cost to us. The assumption that you're using for the 2013 is you're using $18,500 for that same individual. So it's really almost $8,000 more.
Yeah, and that's the piece I'm going to go back and look at.
That's all we have at this time, Your Honor.
There being no other business, then we'll adjourn, and we'll adjourn in memory of the 3 who were killed and the 130 plus that were injured.